There's this pretty universal human instinct that just kicks in the second we decide we want to improve ourselves.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Whether you're looking at your habits or, your relationships or even just your general mental health, our default knee-jerk question is almost always, what's wrong with me?
Right. Always the negative.
We treat our minds like a sputtering car engine, immediately hunting for the broken part so we can yank it out and fix it.
Which, that is completely understandable from an evolutionary standpoint. Our brains are these highly tuned threat detection machines.
Right, we're constantly scanning.
Exactly. We're wired to scan for the negative because noticing the predator in the bushes is what kept our ancestors alive.
Right. It kept us from getting eaten.
Yeah. But when you turn that exact same threat detection system inward and you treat your own psyche as this, broken machine that needs diagnosing, you just quickly trap yourself in a cycle of shame and burnout.
And that tension right there is exactly what we're taking on in today's deep dive. We are completely throwing out that traditional what is broken playbook.
I love that. We really need to.
Yeah. So today, we're pulling from a pretty profound framework laid out by Dr. Paul Conti during his conversation with Dr. Andrew Huberman, and this expands on Conti's book, What's Going Right.
It's such a brilliant shift in perspective.
It really is. And if you're listening to this right now, maybe you're stuck in traffic or, prepping for a meeting, or you're just intensely curious about how to operate your own mind, our mission today is to extract the most actionable tools from this framework.
Which we all need.
Totally. We're going to explore how to build genuine agency, clear away mental roadblocks, and actually optimize your internal climate, entirely bypassing that exhausting trap of self-criticism.
It's a fundamental pivot.
Yeah.
Because the traditional mental health system, despite all the good it does, it's heavily weighted toward pathology.
Right. It's all about what's broken.
Yes. It runs on identifying deficits, matching symptoms to criteria, and applying diagnostic labels. But Dr. Conti makes this incredibly grounded counterargument.
Which is so refreshing.
It is. He says, if you are here listening to a discussion on self-improvement and actively trying to better yourself, there is factually, statistically, far more going right in your neurobiology and your psychology than there is going wrong.
Wow.
You have to start building from that solid foundation.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can figure out what's actually going right, it feels like we first need to figure out who is doing the looking, who is the self that's taking inventory of all this.
That's the crucial first step. And to understand the self, we have to look at a mechanism called state dependence.
State dependence, okay.
Yeah. We live in a hyper-stimulated, high-demand world. Your brain is constantly trying to conserve cognitive energy while navigating wildly different environments.
Right, because work is different from home, which is different from being out with friends.
Exactly. So it compartmentalizes. You might be, say, fiercely assertive and articulate in a boardroom, but then incredibly passive and agreeable at home.
Oh, yeah.
Or completely shut down and anxious when you're alone. It literally feels like you're living 3 different lives.
It really does. It's like you have this rotating cast of characters living in your head. You've got the stressed out worker, the patient parent, the 2 a.m. insomniac.
Yes, the 2 a.m. insomniac is a very real one.
So real. And the crazy part is they don't even seem to share the same memory banks or priorities.
Right, because neurologically, they are operating in completely different associative networks.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the brain shifts your entire biochemical state to match the context you're in.
Okay, so how do we deal with that?
Well, the solution to that fragmentation isn't to try and, kill off those different parts. It's to develop what psychology calls an observing ego.
An observing ego.
Think of it as a higher-level metacognitive awareness that just rides above the turbulence of all those individual states.
So it's watching them.
Exactly. It doesn't judge the stressed worker or the anxious insomniac. It simply notes their presence. It becomes the continuous thread that knits your identity together across all those situations.
I see.
But doing this requires a very specific attitude, which is compassionate curiosity.
Compassionate curiosity.
You cannot bring heavy gravity or judgment or fear to the process of looking inward.
I love that visual. So it's basically like hiring a neutral manager to oversee a bunch of erratic employees.
That's a great way to put it.
The manager doesn't fire anyone, they just take notes. The anxious employee is working the night shift again. Interesting.
Yes, perfect.
But I have to push back here because What if I'm terrified of what that manager is going to find? I
Yeah.
think a huge reason people avoid introspection entirely is this creeping dread that if they look too closely, they'll uncover some, I don't know, dark foundational flaw that just can't be fixed.
What's fascinating here is how incredibly common that exact fear is.
Mm-hmm.
And it stems directly from a societal lack of mental health leadership.
Really? How so?
Well, we're constantly told to practice mindfulness or be present, but nobody actually teaches us the mechanics of sitting with ourselves.
Yeah, that's true. They just say do it.
Right. So the moment an uncomfortable thought arises, we panic. We instantly assume it's a permanent flaw.
Like, oh no, I'm just a broken person.
Exactly. But when you approach self-observation with genuine, lighthearted curiosity, treating your reactions like interesting data rather than moral failings, you quickly realize your self-view is highly malleable.
Meaning it can change.
Yes. You aren't uncovering some rigid, terrible truth about your soul. You're just uncovering neurological patterns. And patterns, by definition, can be rewritten.
That reframing takes so much of the pressure off. I mean, it really does.
It frees you up to actually look.
But it does bring up a practical hurdle. If observing ourselves is the key to rewriting the patterns, how much time should we actually spend doing it?
The balance question.
Yeah, because there has to be a tipping point where compassionate curiosity devolves into, endless navel-gazing.
For sure.
It brings to mind that massive internet debate Mark Andreessen sparked a while ago, the tech investor.
Oh, right. I remember that.
He made this incredibly provocative claim that great historical figures didn't achieve things by sitting around thinking about their thoughts. They just acted. They went out and did things.
Yeah, it struck a nerve because it highlights a very real tension between action and introspection. And the truth is, living at either extreme is a recipe for disaster.
Right.
If you bias entirely toward doing without any reflection, you hit rapidly diminishing returns. You're running on a treadmill, burning energy, but never pausing to check if the treadmill is even facing the right direction.
Just blind momentum.
Exactly. It leads to burnout and a profound sense of emptiness.
But then the flip side is just as bad, right? If
Yeah.
you're all reflection and no action, you're just trapped in a theoretical world.
Precisely. Too much thinking without doing creates a massive feedback loop of rumination. You analyze every possible variable until you become paralyzed by learned helplessness.
Analysis paralysis.
Yes. Action is the mechanism we use to test our thoughts against reality. So finding the balance is critical. And that balance looks different depending on how your specific brain processes information,
Meaning what, exactly?
whether you lean toward being an internal or an external processor.
Oh, which is such a vital distinction.
It really is.
I realized this recently during a massive debate with my sister. We were trying to solve a family logistical problem, and we were totally misaligned.
As families often are.
Oh, entirely.
Right.
We spent 2 hours going back and forth, arguing, throwing out terrible ideas, literally verbally wrestling with the problem.
Right.
And finally, through all that messy external friction, we landed in this perfect Venn diagram of agreement. I realized later there was absolutely zero chance I could have reached that clarity sitting silently in a room by myself.
You needed to bounce it off someone.
I needed the friction of speaking to figure out what I actually thought.
That is the hallmark of an external processor. When you formulate thoughts into words, whether you're debating a sibling or even just, writing in a journal, you force your brain to engage completely different neural pathways than it uses for silent thought.
Wait, really? It's different pathways.
Absolutely. You bring language centers and logic checking functions online, it forces an architecture onto your abstract feelings.
That makes so much sense.
Internal rumination doesn't require that strict error checking, which is why silent worries can spiral into catastrophizing so easily.
Because nobody's there to say, hey, that doesn't make sense.
Not even your own logic centers in some cases.
But let me challenge a cultural assumption here. I feel like society has a massive bias toward internal processors.
Oh, entirely.
We romanticize the strong, silent type. We tend to view the quiet people as the wise, stoic ones who have it all figured out, while the people who talk through their problems are seen as insecure or just projecting their anxiety.
It's a very prevalent stereotype.
Yeah, but I think about my old graduate advisor, Barbara Chapman. Someone once described her to me as quiet, but not shy, which was just perfect.
That's a great description.
When she finally spoke up in a meeting, the signal-to-noise ratio was incredible. She didn't waste a single syllable. But I don't think she was inherently wiser than an external processor. She had just found her optimal operational range.
That is a brilliant distinction. You absolutely cannot map moral or intellectual value onto either style.
Right.
That cultural stereotype of the wise, silent observer is deeply flawed. Because sometimes the person sitting quietly in the corner isn't analyzing deeply at all.
They're just checked out.
Or they're just resolutely stubborn,
Yeah.
locked in a self-referential loop because they refuse to expose their ideas to outside critique.
Oh, wow.
Conversely, a highly verbal external processor might be rapidly prototyping brilliant generative solutions out loud. The metric for success isn't volume.
What is it then?
The metric is, are you effectively asserting yourself in the world? And are you finding gratification in the results?
So it's about calibrating your personal engine, not copying someone else's.
Precisely.
Okay, so let's take this a step further. You've figured out your processing style. You've got your manager online, observing your states with compassionate curiosity.
Right.
But what happens when that manager observes a deeply entrenched behavior that you despise, but you just can't seem to start doing it? Moving from observation to actual behavioral change is the hardest part. Like, we all have a Sharon in our lives.
Let me guess. Sharon is a metaphor for a specific type of relationship.
Oh, absolutely. Sharon is the toxic friend.
Ah, yes. We all know a Sharon.
Right. You keep making plans to get coffee with Sharon, and every single time you leave that coffee shop, you feel completely drained, undermined, and exhausted.
Yeah.
You know it's bad for you. You swear to yourself, I am never hanging out with Sharon again. And then 2 weeks later, you find yourself RSVPing to her birthday dinner. Why do we willingly participate in our own misery when we know better?
It's one of the most frustrating human experiences, but Dr. Conti offers a really powerful reframing tool here. That exhausted, drained feeling you get after dealing with Sharon. Don't view it as a punishment for being weak.
Okay. What is it?
View it as an X that marks the spot on a treasure map. When you observe yourself doing something predictably harmful, you have to dig under the X.
Dig under the drain.
Yes. Ask why the familiar pain of Sharon is more appealing than the unknown. Almost every time, you will uncover a buried, unconscious childhood pattern that you are either blindly repeating or blindly rebelling against.
Because familiarity feels like safety to the nervous system, even if the familiar thing is completely awful.
Exactly. Say you grew up with an incredibly controlling, critical parent.
Okay.
As an adult, lacking an observing ego, your nervous system might seek out friends like Sharon because her critical nature matches your internal blueprint of what connection feels like.
Oh, that is so dark, but it makes so much sense.
Or you might swing to the total opposite extreme and become dangerously permissive with people, refusing to set boundaries just to prove you aren't your controlling parent.
You overcorrect.
Right. In both scenarios, you aren't making a free conscious choice to get coffee. You are acting out a script written decades ago.
And realizing that is the ultimate behavior hack. Because if there's one thing human primates detest more than anything else, it's being controlled.
Oh, we hate it.
It instantly reminds me of how public health officials finally got teenagers to stop smoking in the 1990s.
Yes. The Truth Campaign.
Exactly. For years, they ran ads showing diseased lungs, trying to scare kids. It did absolutely nothing.
Kids don't care about health risks.
Right. Then they launched the Truth Campaign. They ran commercials showing rich, older tobacco executives sitting in boardrooms, literally strategizing about how to manipulate teenagers into addiction to line their own pocket.
And the behavioral shift was staggering.
It really was.
The moment those teenagers realized they weren't being rebellious by smoking, that they were actually being duped and controlled by corporate suits, their primate defiance kicked in.
Nobody wants to be the puppet.
Exactly. Smoking rates plummeted. Not out of a sudden concern for their cardiovascular health, but out of sheer, unadulterated defiance. They refused to be manipulated.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because in the case of our own bad habits, there isn't an evil executive in a boardroom pulling the strings.
Right.
We're doing it to ourselves. So how does that anti-control hack apply to the person who is paralyzed by their own inaction? Take the classic example. The person who says, I know I need to go to the gym, but I get physically exhausted just thinking about it.
A very common feeling.
How do they leverage defiance when they're the ones holding the leash?
It requires a slight but profound shift in perspective. When someone says they get exhausted just thinking about the gym, let's look at the mechanics of what's actually happening.
Okay.
They are performing 10 grueling mental workouts before they even put on their shoes.
That is so true.
They are agonizing over the schedule, negotiating with their guilt, predicting failure, and feeling the shame of that failure. They are burning immense amounts of cognitive glucose with zero physiological payoff.
Exhausting themselves for nothing.
But the breakthrough happens the moment you realize, The you that wants to go to the gym is not your own enemy. The enemy is the outdated script.
So you externalize the pattern. You realize that the fear of failure or the buried belief that you aren't worth the investment, that old script is the tobacco executive in the boardroom. It's pulling a fast one on you.
That's the exact mechanism. Once you recognize that an invisible pattern from your past is actively dictating your present reality and draining your energy, it triggers that exact same healthy defiance.
Wow.
You realize, wait a minute, I am letting a psychological reflex from when I was 12 years old stop me from improving my health today. Absolutely not.
You rebel against the pattern.
Yes. That targeted defiance cuts through the paralyzing fog of guilt and creates instantaneous forward-moving agency.
I love that. You use your own stubbornness as an engine for growth.
Exactly.
But if these past patterns are secretly pulling the strings on our present energy, it makes me wonder about the broader environment of the mind. How do we actively rewire the internal climate so these invisible scripts don't have fertile soil to grow in the first place?
Well, to rewire the climate, we have to look at the fascinating dual way our brains process time.
Dual way.
Yeah. We have two systems that handle temporal reality very differently. Your logical cognitive system, the part of the brain that checks calendars and understands linear progression, operates like a steel rod.
A steel rod.
It is rigid, and it only moves in one direction forward. The past is solidly behind you. The present is right now.
That's the system that knows I have a meeting at 3 p.m.
Right. But your limbic system, your emotional processing center, doesn't use a steel rod. It operates like a string.
Okay, string.
When you encounter an emotional trigger in your present environment, say, a manager uses a specific disappointed tone of voice that perfectly mirrors a humiliating moment you experienced with a teacher 20 years ago, the limbic system takes that string of time and folds it completely in half.
Oh, wow.
It instantly connects that 20-year-old memory to the current second. To your nervous system, then literally becomes now.
That is wild. Time just collapses.
Completely.
It perfectly explains why we can have these massive, seemingly disproportionate reactions to incredibly minor inconveniences. Our body isn't reacting to the email from the manager. Our body's reacting to the 20 years of compounded anxiety that just got folded into the present moment.
Yes, your body thinks the old thread is happening again right now.
So how do we stop the string from folding? Or how do we unfold it?
You can't stop the limbic system from trying to fold the string. That's an automatic survival reflex. But you can use your observing ego to bring the steel rod down to separate it.
Bring in the logic.
Exactly. The moment you feel that disproportionate wave of panic or anger, you consciously intervene and say, wait, my manager's just asking for a status update. This intense fear I'm feeling belongs to 1998, not today. You use logic to physically unfurl the emotional string.
And because the brain has that evolutionary negativity bias we talked about earlier, it's constantly scanning for reasons to fold the string toward trauma.
Always looking for the bad news.
Which means if we want a healthy mental climate, we have to actively counter-program it. There's this brilliant real-world example of this from the field of neuroscience.
Oh, Larry Squire.
Yes, Dr. Larry Squire, who is a pioneer in memory research, he basically mapped the human hippocampus. He had a very specific way of designing his office.
It's such a great example.
He plastered his walls with photos of happy memories, his family, friends, career milestones, and he noted that he didn't even stop to consciously stare at them. But simply by existing inside what Huberman called a vessel of awesome memories, he was implicitly priming his unconscious mind.
Peripherally absorbing it all.
Right. Every peripheral glance gave his brain a microdose of positive bias, altering the baseline climate of his neurochemistry.
It's a masterclass in environmental design. He recognized that the unconscious mind absorbs everything, so he deliberately fed it evidence of safety and connection to counterbalance the brain's default setting of anxiety.
So what does this all mean for the listener who is naturally skeptical? Because I can hear the pushback right now. Isn't this just toxic positivity?
All right, the Pollyanna argument.
Yeah, if I plaster my walls with smiling faces and tell myself everything is great, aren't I just being a Pollyanna? Doesn't doing that make you happy-go-lucky and entirely disconnected from the very real, brutal difficulties of the world?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is the absolute antithesis of toxic positivity.
How so?
Because toxic positivity requires denial. It demands that you ignore the bad. What Larry Squire was doing, what Dr. Conti advocates for, is grounded entirely in empirical truth.
The photos are real.
Yes. The photos on the wall were real events. The joy was real. Acknowledging what is going right, recognizing the resilience you've demonstrated to survive your traumas. That is factually accurate.
You're not making it up.
No, it doesn't erase the suffering, but it balances the neurological ledger. When your internal climate is anchored in your proven strengths, you aren't ignoring the world's dangers. You're actually far better equipped to face them from a front-foot, grounded posture, rather than cowering in a defensive crouch, waiting for the next blow.
That hits the nail on the head. You're not pretending the bad things don't exist. You're just reminding your nervous system that the good things exist too, which provides the actual fuel required to handle the bad.
And that profound balance requires us to completely redefine our cultural concept of happiness.
Redefine it how?
Well, Dr. Conti strongly rejects the phrase happy-go-lucky. He argues that anyone moving through this complex world who is truly go-lucky is likely living in a state of delusion or denial.
Right, because life is hard.
It is. Authentic happiness is much more robust, and it's woven from three distinct threads: peace, contentment, and the capacity for delight.
Peace, contentment, and the capacity for delight. That feels so much more attainable than trying to be ecstatic 24/7.
Because it is attainable. You don't have to be thrilled with every passing minute of your life.
Yeah.
But can you find pockets of internal peace amidst the chaos?
Yeah.
Can you zoom out, look at the totality of your journey, including the failures and the heartbreaks, and find a baseline contentment with the life you've built? And crucially, despite the weathering of time, do you still retain the capacity for sudden delight?
Like, can a good meal or a joke still get to you?
Exactly. Can a beautiful afternoon still make your eyes light up? To illustrate this, Dr. Conti shared an incredibly poignant story about a relative of his, an uneducated man who, through sheer grit, went on to build an international bank.
The 90-year-old banker.
Yes, this man achieved stratospheric financial and professional success. But life also dealt him the most devastating blow imaginable, the tragic loss of a child.
Just unimaginable.
It was a grief he carried with him every single day. And yet, sitting with Dr. Conti in his 90s near the end of his life, this man could look back and honestly say he was at peace. He felt profound contentment with the tapestry of his life, and he was completely ready to face death without fear.
Wow. To carry that level of tragedy and still arrive at peace, that is the ultimate testament to the human spirit.
And the most beautiful detail of the story was that despite the grief, despite the decades of hard work, his face could still instantly line up with pure, unadulterated delight when talking about the simple things he loved.
That's the capacity for delight.
That is what a truly optimized mental climate looks like. It isn't the absence of pain, it's the presence of peace alongside it.
That is an incredibly powerful image to hold on to. Well, we have covered a massive amount of psychological terrain today.
We really have.
We started by completely discarding the "what's wrong with me" diagnostic trap. We explored the mechanics of state dependence and learned how to build an observing ego to watch our minds with compassionate curiosity.
Crucial first steps.
Then we navigated the tricky balance between internal rumination and external action. We figured out how to hijack our primate hatred of being controlled to finally break bad habits by defying our own outdated scripts.
The anti-control hack.
Love that one. And finally, we learned how to use the steel rod of logic to separate emotional time, decorating the walls of our unconscious mind to foster a resilient, true happiness.
It's a transformative toolkit.
Right.
And as we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
In our modern digital age, we spend an exorbitant amount of time, energy, and anxiety curating the photos and narratives we project to the outside world on social media. We desperately try to control how other people perceive our different states.
So true.
But what if, starting today, you took that exact same amount of energy, that exact same meticulous attention to detail, and used it to actively curate the mental images you project onto the inner walls of your own mind? Because at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, whose narrative are you actually living in?
I absolutely love that. So the next time you hear that weird clunking noise in your psychological engine, the next time your anxiety flares up or a bad habit rears its head, don't immediately pop the hood looking for the broken part.
Right. Just observe.
Pause, engage that observing manager, and ask yourself what is going right. You might just realize the engine itself is running beautifully and you just needed to tune the radio to a better station. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.